Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. I'm Richard Harris, your host. So glad you could be joining us today. Do you know in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 28, Jesus commanded us to make disciples of all nations. One of the biggest challenges we have in fulfilling Christ's command today is the fact that atheistic Darwinian evolution is being taught in our public schools. In the early years of the so-called culture wars here in America, conservative Christians spoke often about the problem of Darwinian evolution being taught in our schools. In the 1970s and the 1980s, we were just waking up to the fact that creation, the teaching of creation, had been progressively excluded from our schools and supplanted with Darwinian evolution. Beginning in the 1930s is when that started, and then increasing until the 1960s. Evolution was introduced in schools, but at least students were allowed until the 60s to pray and to read the Bible. But in 1963 and 1964, even prayer and Bible reading was outlawed. A pushback started in the 1980s, and some states started to consider requiring, and some did pass laws, requiring that creation science be given equal time in our schools along with evolution. But in 1987, the United States Supreme Court in Edwards versus Aguillard held that even that was unconstitutional. In other words, a gag order. You cannot talk about creation science because it references a creator. Imagine that. A nation whose very birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, says all men are created equal, forbids its schools to teach kids that all men are created equal. So our schools in America have been indoctrinating our children in materialistic, atheistic, humanistic evolution for 60 years at least. And we wonder as Christians why our country is falling away from its Christian foundations. Speaking of foundations, I believe that the concept of evolution, that everything came from nothing, that life came from non-life, by random chance, I believe this whole idea is the fundamental tenet of the ungodly ideologies that are attacking our culture and society today. The idea of evolution is really it's like a fundamental religious doctrine. You know, the Bible begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, atheism begins with, in the beginning, there was no God or anything except the Big Bang, so you're free to do what you want. You see, the religion of atheism and humanism has to have a foundation to it too. It has to deal with the God issue. And it does it through Darwinian evolution. The Bible says in Psalm chapter 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Likewise, in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, the word says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from his workmanship, so that men are without excuse. All you have to do to believe in God doesn't mean you're saved, but just to even have a mental knowledge of him is to look at the world around us, the moon, the sun, the stars, the beauty of creation, the marvel of our own human bodies in so many ways, the many diverse creatures in the animal kingdom and in the plant kingdom. Consider just the human eye, for example. Think about what the eye does. The eye receives light in all sorts of colors, interprets that light, transferring it into images in the brain somehow in some miracle thing, is able to focus near and far in a split second. And that's just one element of our amazing body. Consider the digestive system in human beings. How in the world could something like that ever come about by chance? Where you're able to take a piece of a fruit or an apple or whatever it is, stick it in your mouth, and your body knows what to do with it to extract the nutrients that it needs to live and function and yet expel the rest of it. This is a miracle in and of itself, and it's one of thousands in the human body. How about reproduction and live human birth? Well, forget about humans for a second. Have you ever seen a hummingbird? Hummingbirds, we're in Colorado here. We got a lot of hummingbirds. I tell you, they are incredible creatures. You know, they're very social. They're very inquisitive. They want to know what humans are doing. But they flap their wings thousands of times a second. Maybe hundreds, I don't know. Faster than you can see because their wings are a blur. When they're flying, you hear this sound. It's like a whirring, high-pitched sound. It's absolutely incredible. What about the Venus flytrap? How does a flower know how to catch and kill a fly? Have you ever seen a peacock spread its feathers? What a glorious display. How could that ever be a matter of chance? How about the glory of the bald eagle? How about the monarch butterfly that flies thousands of miles every year and knows exactly where it's going? You know, what do you call that? Migration of the monarch butterfly, you know? Or how about the octopus, one of the most intelligent animals there is? The salmon. How does a salmon know how to swim upstream and find its nesting place every year? What about humpback whales and how they communicate? Okay, forget about animals. Have you ever looked at an orange? Open an orange up and look at it. How it's divided into these slices and the deliciousness of it. Pineapples, strawberries, mangoes, watermelon, all of them speak, they testify, they sing praise to a good and generous God. And on we could go. The great scientists of the past were Christian. They testified how their study of the natural world pointed to an intelligent designer. Isaac Newton, the father of physics, really, right? Who developed the laws of physics and so forth, you know, gravity and all of that. He said the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Robert Boyle, who's considered to be the father of modern chemistry, said God is the author of the universe and the free establisher of the laws of motion. Have you heard of Wernher von Braun? He was the great German physicist, but he was actually a Christian. And he said this, he said, "For me, the idea of creation is not conceivable without invoking the necessity of design. One cannot be exposed to the law and order of the universe without concluding that there must be design and purpose behind it all." Well, the idea of evolution, brothers and sisters, is not actually new. It actually goes all the way back to Plato. But until modern times, the notion that life came about by chance was thought to be so absurd that it could never really get any widespread support. But that all began to change in 1859 when Charles Darwin published a book called The Origin of the Species. Now, he is considered the father of modern-day theory of materialistic evolution. What happened is, of course, he was already an atheist, but he went to the Galapagos Islands and observed the many diverse creatures there. And he developed a theory. That, now remember, this isn't a new theory, but he began to take the theory of evolution and apply it to these creatures. And the idea that he developed was that their unique features were obtained by chance, by genetic mutation, over hundreds, thousands, millions of years to help them survive in that particular environment. He coined the phrase natural selection and survival of the fittest. Why did he do that? To explain his theory that nature, through the process of harsh conditions, scarcity of resources, predators, and eventually death, that harsh reality forced animals to specialize. The makeup of specific creatures changed randomly through mutations over millions of years, and the mutations would either create a disability or an enhanced ability. And those who developed enhanced abilities would have an advantage over their other creatures, so the other creatures would die out, whereas those with the enhanced abilities would live. This is called survival of the fittest. Darwin claimed that originally there were very simple life forms that over time, because of this process, became more and more complex. And over millions of years, eventually we see the human being come on the scene. Now, this theory had no evidence behind it at all, and it never has. There has never been a test contrived where it was proven to happen. In fact, it's been attempted in laboratories to by mixing in the amino acids and the raw materials to see if DNA would be formed, all right? And they've never been successful at it. They've never been able to form the molecule that develops into DNA by chance in a laboratory. Now, if man can't do it when he's trying to do it in ideal conditions, how in the world does it happen by chance in nature? There's never been a case where evolution was actually observed by human beings to happen in nature. There's never been discovered any examples of evolution in the fossil record. Now, there's been extinct animals found, animals with unique features, but they've never found anything that proves evolution. Further, the concept of evolution runs contrary to the fundamental laws of physics, including the law of entropy, which says that left to themselves without an input of energy and design, all things tend from a state of order to disorder, basically everything is decaying. This theory, but the thing is, guys, the theory of evolution didn't need proof. It didn't need proof because the spirit of Antichrist working in men gave us the desire to believe it. People want to believe it because it means there's no God. And if there's no God, there's no accountability. You see, as it says in Romans chapter 1, verses 21 to 23, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. That's evolutionists right there, isn't it? Professing themselves to be scientists, they became idiots and changed the glory of the incorruptible God unto the image made like to corruptible man and to birds and to four-footed beasts and creeping things. And in verse 28, Romans says, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, you see the choice element in here. There's something going on here besides reason and science. What's going on here is we don't want to believe in God, so we find a reason not to. It says God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2 says that the prince of the power of the air, the spirit, is the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. You see, there's a spiritual dimension to this whole evolution thing. All those who do not want to believe in God, did not want to believe in God, what they needed was an intellectual pretext. An intellectual pretext that didn't sound absurd. And Charles Darwin gave that to them. As founding father Thomas Paine warned us, 50 years before Charles Darwin came on the scene, Thomas Paine said that teaching evolution in schools would lead to a, quote, species of atheism. And that's exactly what has happened. It wasn't long after Darwin before our colleges and universities began to embrace this new so-called science called evolution. And then it began to spread to all of our schools, and from there into arts, into media, into entertainment, and all of the seven mountains. And not long after Darwin, the concept of secular humanism arose. This false God-denying religion, if you will, relies on the new science of evolution. Secular humanism says there is no God. It says religion is a weak man's crutch, and that all public society must be secular. We have to drive God out of public life. That's secular humanism. From this foundation, all sorts of evil and deadly ideologies and beliefs have sprung up. Evolution is the fundamental belief that enabled people in the last 125 years to believe that abortion is good and that you have a fundamental right to kill your own baby. To believe that homosexuality and transgenderism are good and valid, and that God didn't make us male and female. Don't believe your lying eyes. No, gender is subjective. You can be whatever gender you want to be. Environmentalists believe the natural realm is where we came from. It's our mother. Have you ever heard the phrase Mother Nature? It's our mother and our God. It is worthy of worship. That's why they say it has to be preserved at all costs. It has to be preserved, nature does, in its pristine state, notice, right? Anything that pollutes, removes, diminishes, takes away, shrinks nature is inherently evil, the environmentalists believe. You see, they believe we, human beings, we're of no more value than any other aspect of nature, from animals and trees and flowers and everything else. This all is predicated on the rejection of God, and the rejection of God is predicated upon the doctrine, the lying doctrine of evolution. And this idea is so fundamental to leftist dogma in our country that it has become sacrosanct. It is now a religion. It is sacred dogma, beyond the reach of reason. You can no longer allow any rational inference that God exists or that God created the world in our public institutions or in our colleges or universities. It has to be 100% secular. The Bible, our schools of science today will not allow students to challenge the theory of evolution. You are not allowed to speak up on creation science. Professors are rejected and fired and terminated. Their works are not published. If you believe in creation science as a scientist, you have to go elsewhere. You have to do your own thing. The Bible says in Psalms 11, verse 3, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, I want to turn that around today. I think we need to attack the devil's foundations. I think it's time that we destroyed the foundational teaching of evolution. We need to go after it in our pulpits. We need to go after it in our broadcast programs, in our blogs, in our articles. We need parents to fight against it in their homes and at school board meetings. We need Christian doctors, Christian scientists, Christian lawyers to fight against it in medical schools, in research labs, in publishing houses, in courts, and in Congress. You know, I used to live in a neighborhood where we had built our dream home before we left everything and came to Colorado. And right next to me, they tried to build a house in the lot next to me, but they didn't pay attention to the building lot limit line. And the foundation of the house went over the line. The neighbor behind them complained. And they had to spend probably $50,000 to $100,000 bringing in a massive machinery to break up and remove that foundation, right? So that's how it is with evolution. That foundation has been laid, but it's over the line. And we as the church need to rise up and demand that it be removed. We need to destroy it with the truth. We should be strong and bold on this issue. We have nothing to be ashamed about. There is amazing evidence on our side. The facts and reason are on our side. The evidence supports not only creation, but the biblical account. Abundant evidence exists to corroborate a young earth, for example. DNA, the magnetic field. How about curving rock formations, curving rock strata, the amount of silt in the sea, and many, many other facts. Here to discuss all of this with us today is a new guest to Truth and Liberty, David Rives. David is a weekly news columnist on science and the Bible. He's the author of 2 books, Wonders Without Number and 21 Verses Backed by Science. He's been featured on the History Channel, DirecTV's NRB Network, WND, TBN, Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk, CBN, Family Life, and several others. And so we're super honored and excited to have David Rives joining us today on Truth and Liberty. We're going to share an announcement with you. After that, we'll be right back with this amazing interview. You won't want to miss it.
America needs Christians of steadfast faith to stand up and boldly proclaim the promises of God. Faith for America by Richard Harris shows how the prayers and steadfast faith of ordinary believers can carry a nation through its darkest hours. Now is the time to stand firm, pray boldly, and keep fighting for freedom, trusting God to bring light from tragedy. Order your copy today.
All right, welcome back to the Truth and Liberty Show. And just very excited today to have as our special guest David Rives. Now, in my monologue, folks, I referred to him as David Rives, and that was my mistake. Please, I apologize for that. But David, thank you so much for joining us on Truth and Liberty today.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
David, we're so thankful to have you. You know, the subject of evolution to me is it's just a critical issue, and I don't think we talk about it enough in conservative Christian circles, and how we can fight it, and the need to get it out of our public schools, and for Christians to become, better equipped to deal with it. Do you feel the same way about that? Is evolution a real problem in our culture? The doctrine.
Absolutely. When it comes to conservative values, what are we trying to conserve? We're trying to conserve biblical values. What are the issues? Well, a lot of the issues that are coming up is this extreme radicalism versus a biblical worldview. But then when it comes to biblical worldview or extreme radicalism, where's the extremeness happening? It's happening in gender ideology. It's happening in, all these different areas. But wait, gender ideology is the whole idea that there's more than just male and female, as Jesus told us in the New Testament. But Jesus is only reiterating what goes all the way back to creation, when God Himself made male and female. I mean, you could pretty much take that tack with climate change. You could take that tack with anything you wanted to on the conservative versus radical spectrum. And it all comes down to what was stated in the Bible, and can we trust it at face value?
That's right. How did God make us, and what's His plan for us? And that's what evolution does. It destroys all of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it destroys our self-worth, because if you think about it, for the last couple of generations at least, these children and now young adults they've grown up learning, hey, I'm an accident of the cosmos. I'm star stuff. I'm the result of a chaotic something happen chance that basically caused mutations in time to turn me from fish to bird to ape to man. Therefore, I'm an animal. Well, when you start telling people and teaching them, and they begin believing that they're animals, that they're nothing more than a highly evolved ape-like creature, well, then we shouldn't be surprised when we see a lot of things going on in our culture, in our society today, of people taking animalistic behaviors and just replicating that. When you start teaching people that they have a chance origin as opposed to created with purpose, created in the image of God, as stated in the Bible, well, then all of a sudden you start to see suicide rates go up, teen suicide on the rise, veteran suicide at 22 veteran suicides every single day. All of these things because people see absolutely no value in their life. It all comes back to creation.
Yeah, what's that baby in the womb if it evolved by chance anyway? It's just another product of nature. None of us have any purpose or meaning, so I can do what I want, right?
That's right. And that's been the lie since the beginning, when the serpent tempted Adam and Eve and said, hey, you don't need to follow the very simple instruction, which says don't eat from that tree. You don't need to worry about this perfect garden that you're living in. You don't need to worry that everything has been provided for you. What you need to do is be jealous of God. You want to be like God. You want to have all of His knowledge. You want to be able to do everything that He does. You want to be able to usurp His authority. So therefore, all you have to do is just don't do that one thing that He told you not to do, right? Just disobey that simple command, and all of a sudden, society fell apart. We've been living in a sin-cursed world ever since, where all creation groans, and that temptation is alive today. It's been alive for thousands of years. It was very alive back during the time of Charles Darwin, and it's one of the precipitating moments where Charles Darwin realized, hey, I can make my own rules if I'm not created in God's image. Why don't we come up with a theory that pushes God out of the picture?
Yeah, so true. Well, David, let's take a minute. I want to go into a lot more depth with you today, but I want to take just a few minutes to talk a little bit about your ministry and what you do. So you lead David Rives Ministry, but you've also, you're on television, and you've got a lot of other things going. Tell us what you do.
Yep. When I was 8 years old, I started collecting fossils in my backyard. Never knew that it would turn into the Wonder Center and Science Museum one day. When I was 16 years old, I began taking photos with telescopes, astrophotography. As a hobby, it was just something fun that I could do at nighttime and connect cameras to the back of telescopes. It led to this ministry, David Rives Ministries, but even then, I couldn't have imagined where it would take me. Because, yes, we've got a lot of different aspects. A television program called the Genesis Science Report, podcasts, we have a lot of social media. And then in addition, I speak at universities and churches and colleges. And we have Genesis Science Network, a 24/7 television network dedicated to proclaiming God's glory. And now, as of 2 years ago, the Wonder Center and Science Museum, the largest science museum in Tennessee, but actually the largest science museum in the world from a Christian perspective.
Well, fantastic. I think there's an image of it behind you, but I copied it off your website and I can show it now without you in front of it. Is that okay if we do that? Let's put that image up.
Absolutely.
And let's show the Wonder and Science Museum.
Yeah. So
if
that image is up right now, you're staring at over 100,000 square feet. It's got 2 primary wings. There are 3 floors. There are exhibit halls dedicated to every aspect of science that you can imagine. There are exhibit halls dedicated to astronomy, paleontology, biology, zoology. The massive sphere that you see is a planetarium, and in fact, it's one of the top 10 planetariums in the entire world based on size and technology. So it immerses you into space, flying past galaxies and planets, but at the same time teaches you that you are not an accident of the cosmos, that even though we live in this massive cosmos too large for us to fathom, we are special. We're created in God's image. The cosmos is made to declare the glory of God, as Psalm 19 says.
Yeah, fantastic. David, I've heard people over the years say, well, I'm a Christian and I believe in evolution. I just believe God directed evolution. Do you have a problem with that kind of thinking? Is that sound theology?
Yeah, so Richard, that's where it gets really sticky, because the first thing that you have to ask someone is, what do you mean by evolution? And this is where most of the time, not just laymen, even scientists will fall apart. PhDs will fall apart when you ask them that one simple question. And they'll typically respond something like this. They'll say, well, when I say evolution, I mean, mutations. To which I would reply, wait a second, we see mutations all the time. They're observable. They're good science, right? So if that's what you mean by evolution, I suppose I believe in evolution. And then they pivot. And Richard, they'll say something like, okay, no, what I really meant was, survival of the fittest. And I'm like, okay, well, you mean the lion is going to catch the slowest impala and the fastest impala is going to get away? That's a fact of life. That's observable. So therefore, if that's what you mean by evolution, then I suppose I believe in evolution. And finally, as you continue to ask those questions, they run out of things to say. And then they're like, well, like we evolved from ape-like ancestors. And that's where you say, no. That is completely contrary to all of theology as we know it. Because if we evolved from ape-like ancestors, the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis, we're given a dominion mandate that we should have dominion over the things around us on this earth. Adam was put in charge of naming the animals. They were given care of tending the garden. That doesn't mean that we abuse what God's given us. Dominion doesn't mean that we're going to use it to abuse it, but we're going to use it to our advantage. So therefore, for us to be considered just another animal means that, well, I guess we have control over ourselves. We have dominion over ourselves. No, that's bad theology. We are created in God's image, fearfully and wonderfully made, very distinctly different from animals. And therefore, the idea of Darwinian evolution, or actually how I like to put it, universal common descent, because that's technically the right term. Everything in the universe commonly descended from a single organism, which then evolved from there. That is absolute pseudoscience. It has no business being taught in our schools, in our universities, in our kindergarten books. It's poisoning the minds of our youth because they're being told that they have no purpose in life.
Yeah. Well, the Bible teaches over and over again that Jesus died in our place on the cross, David, that he took our place so that we wouldn't have to die. Romans chapter 5 says he did that because sin entered the world and through sin, death. So if I'm understanding the Bible correctly, this means that death came from sin after mankind and all of the world was created. But doesn't evolution teach that death was present from the beginning and not a consequence of sin, but just part of what, if you're a Christian, I suppose you'd say God used death to create? These things seem incompatible to me.
Yeah, Richard, it's a good point. If sin really is the transgression of the law, all have sinned. By sin entered death into the world. Those are biblical principles, and then Jesus came to pay the penalty, the death penalty of our sins, so that we wouldn't have to eternally die, right? But that whole point of Jesus coming to pay the death penalty means that death came about as a result of sin. So, we know when the first sin took place. It was Adam and Eve, two real individuals living in the garden. And that means that would be the entrance of death into the world. Right. If you say, well, you've got Adam and Eve right here, but long before that, eons before that, you have death, disease, destruction. The fossil record is replete with billions, actually trillions and trillions of fossils and microfossils that show that things have lived and died. So if you try to put those things before sin, before the existence of Adam and Eve, billions of years ago, then all of a sudden you're taking this first step of compromise in our very foundational truths written in the Bible.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, and didn't Jesus himself refer, I think you alluded to this earlier, didn't he quote Genesis, the creation account, at least Genesis chapter 2, and didn't he also refer to Noah and the flood as literal events, taking the Bible at face value on what it says?
In theology, in the study of the book of Genesis, some Bible scholars, and this is mainly an idea from about 150 years ago, but some Bible scholars have attempted to put a gap in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. So Genesis 1:1 in the Hebrew says, Bereshith bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Simple phrase, right? Genesis 1:2 says the earth was without form and void, okay? So some Bible scholars have suggested, well, what if we just insert massive amounts of time in between the beginning, Genesis 1:1, and when the first life appeared on the earth? Could that work? But as you mentioned, Richard, Jesus himself in the book of Matthew says, have ye not read that from the beginning God made them male and female? Well, ask any theologian, when is the beginning? They're going to say Genesis 1:1. So Jesus couples the beginning of time with the origin of male and female, man and woman, Adam and Eve. They can't be separated. Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 are a continuation. Genesis 1:2 is just explaining that the earth had no habitation until God inhabited it. We even find, and it's really interesting, if you go to the book of Isaiah 45, I believe, it says, thus saith the Lord, God himself who formed the earth and made it, he hath established it, he created it not in vain, and he formed it to be inhabited. But the words not in vain and formed to be inhabited, you're actually going to find the exact same Hebrew words there as found in Genesis 1:2, which means that the whole point of it is to say that God created an empty, uninhabited globe, and then he spends the next 6 days inhabiting it, filling it so that he can have a relationship with us, so that he can express his creativity through the animals and the plants and everything else that's alive. But that only makes sense. If you trust the words of Jesus at face value, it only makes sense in a literal creation perspective, not with eons of time.
Yeah, Jesus said from the beginning, God made them male and female, and for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. Therefore, the two shall become one flesh. What God has put together, let not man separate. So if we say, no, that's not what happened. No, men and women evolved in some way, and at some indistinct point in history, suddenly human beings existed. Are you making Jesus a liar? How can we trust anything Jesus said? So is it, we can't just, my point, I guess, what I'm asking you, David, is if we try to make Genesis 1 symbolic, do we destroy the credibility of the entire Bible?
Yeah, even Jesus said that. I don't need to speak for it. Jesus said it himself. He said, if ye believe not the writings of Moses, why should you believe my words? Moses was writing about me. We have to believe in the Pentateuch, in the writings of Moses, including the creation account. Jesus said so. He said it's absolutely essential to understanding the very character of Jesus himself. But you know what? This is happening in society today where we're like, oh, well, maybe he could have used evolution and people have evolved over time. All of a sudden, here's one area where racism can creep in. Because if evolution has taken place and humans have evolved from ape-like ancestors over the past 300,000 years, well, what does that mean? It means some humans are closer, probably closer in the linear chain to apes, and some humans are more highly evolved. That's the very same lies used by the Nazi regime, used by Hitler. That's the very same lies that are being pushed today to talk about this racism that is blanketing the country. Well, wait a second. If we were to understand that we're all on a level playing field, that we're all one blood created in the image of God, then racism is done away with. Can people still treat other people cruelly? Absolutely. But the premise for racism would be absolutely abolished if only we stood on biblical principles.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, let's talk about creation evidence a little bit. What do you think some of the strongest points are in science today that prove that we were created, not evolved?
I think that some of the most important, most substantial claims that are coming out today within genetics are probably some of the most profound when it comes to the idea of creation. Because we realize, and I wrote about this in my second book, we realize that you've got a genetic code inside each and every person, right? Everybody watching this right now has a unique DNA sequence, their own blueprint for life, their own book that was written. That book was fashioned at the time of conception, right? Not from birth, from conception. They had their own book written. Now, if you were to ask geneticists, they would tell you, well, there are trillions upon trillions of combinations that make up human DNA. And based on how the letters of the alphabet are written across the pages, if we're thinking of it in a book form, that's what makes you unique compared to the person sitting next to you on the couch listening to this right now. Okay, well, let's take it one step further. If you were to write out your genetic sequence, your blueprint, it would fill up 1,200 encyclopedia volumes.
Wow.
Now, that's a lot of information, right? But then consider this, that entire 1,200 encyclopedia volumes of information, well, that's found in one single cell, and we've got a lot of cells. Every cell contains that exact same information, which means that there's enough information in you right now to fill up the entire Library of Congress multiple times. And again, your book is 100% unique to you. You are your own human being from the time of conception. Wow. All right, so now we've got these design patterns of a book that's written that makes you unique. But then we see the engineering that has to take place, because I could have a book laying around and I could pick up a book, and the book is not going to create, let's just say, the automobile, right? You could have the automobile's manual, And the automobile manual, you could read it as many times as you wanted to, the automobile is not going to appear, even if you have the instructions to make the automobile in front of you. No, an engineer has to then work with a crew and put it all together to create the automobile from the book. Except with humans, we've got a book inside each and every one of us that self-replicates. It creates life as it goes. Now that takes an engineer of a masterful level to make something that can actually recreate itself every few seconds when it comes to cellular formation. That's a miracle.
It is a miracle. You know, if you're walking in the woods someday and you stumble up and all of a sudden there's a MacBook computer sitting on the ground, no one would have to be told, oh, someone made this. No, you would know it instinctively. And anyone who looked at it and said, oh, look, nature somehow came together and look, we have a MacBook just by random chance over 1,000,000 years. You'd think the person was insane or delusional or they needed psychiatric help, right? And yet we look at human beings and that's exactly what we're doing, isn't it?
Yes, except on a grander level, because a human being is like, our brains are like the greatest supercomputer that was ever invented. Our bodies are like a fighter jet, right? All of these things are on the extreme level. So yes, and think about it for a second, because it's easy for us to get caught up in Christianese, right? And we're like, oh yes, amen, amen, to the people who agree. But put it on a skeptic's level. If an atheist is sitting there, they would laugh at the idea that the MacBook just happened by chance. And then they would turn right around and say, but I still think that we could have somehow maybe evolved, right? They can't tell you how we evolved. They can't give you the mechanisms. They can't tell you how the original life formed. They have no way to break the laws of nature in order to spontaneously generate life, and yet they still believe it. And they would laugh at the idea of a MacBook appearing out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. There's a contrast there where it's a duality of beliefs. The skeptic or the devout atheist is saying, yes, we believe in something that is, completely implausible, while laughing at the idea that a MacBook could make itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, there's another concept out there that to me personally is one of the strongest proofs against evolution and in favor of the Word of God and its reliability, and that's something that sometimes we call the Cambrian explosion. Are you familiar with that? And can you tell our viewers about that?
Absolutely. I've spent many days inside the Grand Canyon hiking, documenting, researching. I've been all over the world, including in Colorado, looking at some of the incredible rock formations. And what we find is that you've got bedrock, you've got igneous or metamorphic rocks, kind of like the foundational stones of the earth. And then the very next layer that you'll see is typically sedimentary. Sedimentary usually means water lane in nearly every case, which I believe points to a biblical flood. But those sedimentary layers, you'll get to the point where you have a few layers and there's absolutely nothing in those layers. No life, no trace of anything. And then boom, you hit one layer. And all of a sudden, complex life forms emerge. All of a sudden, you have every major body type all in one place, sitting there in the fossil record. Now, that's called the Cambrian explosion. And according to secularists, they'll say, I guess life exploded on the scene, right? Somehow hyperevolution occurred, and all of a sudden, you've got stasis for a long period of time, punctuated equilibrium kicks in, and all of these fancy terms are thrown around, basically, and boom, life evolves suddenly and rapidly on the scene. But wait a second. If on the very first level of the fossil record that we find life, we find fully formed life beings, we find nearly every major body type of life forms, we see full functionality without any evolutionary processes, doesn't that actually mean that life was probably specially created by God began to flourish on the earth, and then there was a judgment that took place, something that we call the Great Flood or the Great Deluge, found in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. And that judgment that took place wiped out and preserved all of those fossils within the record of geology.
Yeah.
That makes a whole lot more sense from a Cambrian explosion.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in this layer, the Cambrian layer, you find all levels of life mixed in there. It's not like, oh, the bottom and, and they're all packed in. No, it's all spread out. There's no differentiation. And doesn't that point to a catastrophic event, just like the Bible talks about?
Yeah, what's also interesting, Richard, is the geologic column is touted. You'll go to the Smithsonian, you'll see the geologic column. You'll go to most museums, and you're going to see this geologic column. And the geologic column has eras, or eons, or ages, or periods, and or mega sequences. And you're going to see billions of years between some of those sequences, millions of years between a lot of those sequences, right? Well, in the fossil record, we do see that there is somewhat of an order of the species within the geological record, right? So there's something to this geologic column that museums present. There's an order, but there are no dates ascribed to the order, right? You pick a fossil from the lowest levels and it doesn't have a tag on it saying, I was buried 300 million years ago. No, of course not. What we do notice is that order starts at the very lowest layers with marine creatures, trilobites, nautiloids, all sorts of things like that, right? As you move up in the geological column, those middle layers tend to have dinosaurs and amphibians and swamp-dwelling creatures. As you move up in the fossil record, you do tend to find more of a prevalence of mammals and larger land animals and birds and things like that. Wait a second. During a global flood, if the fountains of the great deep break open and tremendous amounts of mud, sand, silts, and sediments start rushing across the continents, what are they going to hit first? They're going to be in the middle of the ocean basins, massive mudslides roaring across the oceans and burying the ocean creatures, those trilobites, those nautiloids, those marine creatures first. Then those tsunamis are going to reach land and they're going to start laying down layer after layer of mud, burying those swamp creatures who are on the very edges of a pre-flood supercontinent, right? The dinosaurs, the amphibians, the swamp-dwelling creatures. Then as soon as all of those are buried, the next layers of mud are going to start burying all of the land animals and all of these other things. But throughout it all, you still find all of these marine or water-based fossils. What are the chances that exactly what we find in the fossil record, where you bury the deep sea creatures first, then the swamp creatures, and then the land animals, is the exact order that we find within the geological record, and it's the exact order that we would expect if biblical history is correct?
Well, people may say back to you, David, well, yeah, but what about millions of light years? How is it possible for Genesis, the account of God creating the world in 6 days, to be true if the stars that we see took millions of years for the light even to arrive at Earth?
Yeah. If you think, okay, I've taken photos with my telescopes at the Wonder Center with big observatory class telescopes that we have here. I've taken photos of supernovae, of exploding stars. Wow. And those supernovae, those exploding stars are, usually more than 6,000 light years away. So the argument becomes, well, I guess it took more than 6,000 years for the light to get there. But there's an important designation, because a light year is not a measurement of time, it's a measurement of distance. It's the distance that light would travel at 12 million miles a minute after an entire year, right? So it's not a time, it's a distance. But we know that here on Earth, light typically travels about 12 million miles a minute, right? 186,000 miles a second. Why does that mean that that's the way it functions everywhere else in the universe? And why does that imply that that's the way it has functioned even from the very origin moment of creation? When there are 16 verses scattered throughout the scriptures, and I go through a lot of those verses in one of my books, where I show that those verses all imply a stretching of the heavens. He stretcheth out the heavens like a curtain, like a scroll, like a tent. It implies this elasticity, which means if Albert Einstein is correct in his theories of general relativity, then gravity affects time. Then
Yes, it does.
time is almost like a fabric that can be stretched, and it's pliable. So if God stretches the fabric of the universe, then that changes the amount of time that it takes for light to get from point A to point B. We could go, if we had 30 minutes, I would go into 3 physics principles that actually make it very biblically doable for light to reach us in only 6,000 years. But let me just summarize and say it's very doable. Do you know what's not doable? The skeptic, the atheistic astronomer, believes in something called inflation. If you ask him to explain inflation, he'll say, well, David, in the first few picoseconds after the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was stretching faster than the speed of light, and then it magically slowed down to its current expansion rate. They have no mechanism for expansion to speed up. They have no mechanism for it to slow down to its current rate. It's all magic. But we actually have a biblical principle that says that about 6,000 years ago, if you start backing up the biblical chronologies, God created a universe. He put everything on the fabric of space-time, and He stretches it out.
Wow, that's fascinating. Where can people go to learn more about that specific subject of the speed of light and why it doesn't support evolution in an old Earth?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm trying to remember the URL. I believe it is davidrives.com, David, RIVES.com / speed of light. And I'm pretty sure, I'll have to double check, but I've done several videos with colleagues, Dr. Russ Humphreys, physicist. I've done a video with Dr. Danny Faulkner, PhD in astronomy, and he wrote the foreword to my first book as well. So there's an abundance of information out there on our website and in our books and videos that sort of go more in detail in this topic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of your books, you've alluded to one of them, I think, today, but I got a copy of it here. It's called 21 Verses Backed by Science, and this is your newest one, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, tell us what's in here.
Yeah, so in 21 Verses Backed by Science, it's a short read. It is designed at the layman level. It's where anyone can understand. I basically break down 21 specific references scattered throughout the entire Bible and ask a question. Does the Bible know best? Is this a scientifically accurate statement? And in every case, the answer is yes, which begs the question, why? Because some of those statements were written thousands of years before science ever caught up to the reality of what was going on. Why, unless the authors of those books of the Bible that we consider the Bible, the authors of Genesis, the authors of Job, the authors of 2 Peter, the authors of all of these different books of the Bible were more than just writing down their own thoughts. They were indeed inspired by God to write down something that even though they couldn't fully understand it, would thousands of years down the road be proven to be scientifically accurate.
Yeah.
And so that's 21 verses backed by science.
Boy, it seems like that happens so much, doesn't it? The secular academia will, they'll reject biblical claims to everything. I mean, I was in Israel earlier this year and learned that they actually claimed that David was a fictional character, didn't really exist until the city of David was discovered right outside the old walls, just like the Bible talks about. And, I want to deal with, in just a couple minutes, real quick if you can, radiometric dating. So whenever something is discovered, you always hear on the news, oh, this is 5 billion or 20 million years old or whatever, based on carbon-14 data. Do you believe that we are misinterpreting that information, and is carbon-14 dating, is it reliable? And if not, why not?
Yeah, we're absolutely misinterpreting. You would be shocked at how many people say that C14 dating proves that the Earth is millions of years old. And any nuclear chemist will tell you that's not the case. Anyone who understands radiometric decay knows that all measurable amounts of C14, carbon 14, is gone. Within 80,000 years, you wouldn't have any traces left. And yet we find C14 measurable amounts in dinosaur bones, supposedly went extinct 66 million years ago. Well, measurable amounts of C14 means that dinosaur went extinct less than 80,000 years ago. We found measurable amounts of C14 in coal, supposedly 300 million years old coal, but now all of a sudden, that means that it can't be any older than 80,000 years. And diamonds, supposedly up to 3 billion years old, diamonds, impervious to contamination, are exhibiting actual C14 still left in those samples, which means that diamonds can't be 3 billion years old. Instead, they're less than 80,000 years old. What I'm telling you is that all of the data seems to be indicating that this entire universe is less, much less than 80,000 years old. And the very few methods of radiometric dating of geochronometers that seem to indicate opposite, well, they're so fraught with assumptions that there's no way to actually say for certain.
And with 2 minutes left in the show, David, are there other ways to date rocks, fossils, and all these other sorts of things that are reliable?
Yes. Oh, there are over 100 geochronometers, ways that we can take rocks, fossils, or other things on Earth and date them, time them, geochronometers. And the fact is that out of over 100 different ways to date things, there is only about 1% at this point that seems to indicate some type of ancient Earth. And that 1 to 5% of those those are all so fraught with assumptions. They're so open to interpretation, in other words, that you could make them say that the universe was 2 seconds old or 2 trillion years old, whatever you wanted to, right? So we shouldn't be using those anyway. We should use the over 90% of other methods that seem to indicate that Bible history is correct.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for coming on Truth and Liberty. Folks, you need to go check out his website. Can you share your main website with us again?
Yeah, absolutely. DavidRives.com, David, RIVES.com. Sign up for our email updates for free. We send you free videos on science and the Bible. And then visit wonderscenter.org, wonderscenter.org, and plan your trip to the Wonder Center and Science Museum. Kids' hands-on activities, one of the top 10 planetariums, exhibits. There's something for everyone.
Excellent. Well, guys, there you go. David Rives, we just barely began to scratch the surface of all this. Check out his show, visit his museum, go to his website and get a copy of his latest book, 21 Verses, and be sure to join us next time here on Truth and Liberty.